What is up, plant people? It's Tuesday again, and that means it's time for another episode of the Planthropology Podcast, the show where we dive into the lives, careers, and general awesomeness of some very, very cool plant people. I'm Vikram Blee, your host and your humble guide in this journey through the plant sciences, and as always, I am thrilled to be with you today. You like history? You like plants? You like talking about plants in history? Well, if you answered yes to any of those questions, you're going to love today's episode. If you answered no to any of those questions, just hold on. I bet we can change your mind. So my guest today is a Twitter friend that I've had for a while named Natalie Sabin. And Natalie is an ecologist, a computer scientist, and has done all kinds of stuff. But she's also the host of the Across the Ages podcast, a really, really great show that you need to be listening to, where she dives into different topics across the ages and talks about everything from like shoes to weaponry to alcohol. And it's really fascinating and a lot of fun. And her personality is just fantastic. And so I thought, oh, hey, you are a self-proclaimed plant person, Natalie. Would you like to come talk to me about the history of gardens? And she graciously agreed. And so we chatted for a very long time. I think she's in the UK. No, I mean, I know she's in the UK, but I think I got up about 5:30 and we started recording about 6 a.m. Texas time, my time. And maybe that's noon in the UK. I don't understand time zones. But so this is kind of a long episode because I was so into it, I didn't even pay attention to the clock. And I'm not sorry. Listen to it in 2 chunks if you have to. But this thing is great from start to finish, and you're going to love it. Again, if you're not a history buff, if you're not a history nerd, or more specifically a plant history nerd, I bet we can change your mind. It's really fascinating. So, I don't know what else to say about it except that Natalie's brilliant. She is an absolute delight to talk to, and I know that you're going to love her as much as I do. So, buckle up, grab your history books to, prop up your iPhone so you can listen to the podcast, and you're ready for a great episode of Planthropology with Natalie Sabin from Across the Ages. I haven't studied history a lot, personally, but I'm a history nerd. And every time I hear about something I can tell everybody, I'm like, hey, this happened then. And some people are like, I really don't care. And I'm like, I don't care if you don't care. I'm telling you anyway. So now that I've rambled enough, Natalie, how are you this morning/afternoon?
I am really good. I've had my cup of tea, so I am ready to go. It's a nice warm day. A bit warm actually, but it's okay. I'm really, really good, and I'm excited to chat you through what we're going to talk about today, really, because I like talking, which is why I have a podcast, and I like hanging out with my Twitter. It's like I call it my Twitter fam. It's the Twitter family. I've gained so many friends, particularly over the pandemic when everyone's been like, hey, there's nothing to do. I'll just sit on Twitter and social media. And then you start to find that little bubble of like-minded people, that are interested in the same things and generally have the same views. And, it's nice to create that little, there's other people who think like me and are interested in the stuff I'm interested in. So, yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, and it's fun to, I think the way that we approach, and this has nothing to do with the show necessarily, but the way that we approach friendship in 2021, especially over the past 2 years, like you said, through the pandemic, is totally different, right? It's so exciting. Just this is the first time I think we've spoken, quote unquote, face to face, across the computer. But I feel like we know each other pretty well just from being internet friends already.
And obviously I listen to Planthropology as well. So when I heard your voice, I was like, I know that voice. I know this guy.
So we're going to talk about your show here in a little bit, but I want to hear a little bit more about you first. So, I think you are, again, a ecologist, a nature person, and I think you have self-described, I've seen on Twitter, as a plant person. Your family does a lot of plant stuff. So I just want to hear your story a little bit. Introduce yourself some more.
Yeah, so I actually retrained in 2017. I went to uni a while ago. 2011, I graduated, and I actually did computer science.
Oh, okay.
So I did information management and computing was my degree, which was basically glorified librarian. So it used to be called library sciences, but like the kids didn't think that was cool. So they like renamed it. And the whole reason I did that is because I like was good at IT at A level, and
Hmm.
in Britain, when you're good at a subject, you carry it on to the next level, and that's the end of it. From year 9 to the age of 11, you carry it on, and then you carry it on to sixth form, which is post 16, and then I thought that you had to carry that on to university. I didn't know anyone who had been to university. My family's never been to university. So there was no one to say, hey, you can literally do whatever you want at uni. And then I went and carried something on, and then people are like, hey, I've done zoology at uni, and I've done like marine science. And I was so jealous of that I missed that, because if I
Hmm.
would do it all again, I would go and do something to do with biology or whatever. So I did project management for ages because I'm good at I'm good at organizing things, basically. And I got made redundant in 2017. And someone had said to me, like one of my managers, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And this is before the redundancy. This is before any of that. And I went, I'd be in Florida saving manatees or something. That was like my answer straight away. And he was like, why don't you then? And I was like, what? I'm a project manager. This is my career now. I've done it for, 5-6 years. This is it. I'm stuck here. And then I got made redundant. Um, and I was like, okay, this is my time. This is what I'm going to do. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, maybe let's not move to the US. Maybe let's see if I can do something like that here. And so I started volunteering at one of the local wildlife trusts. So there's 46, I think, across the UK. They're basically local county based. And I know all that because I used to work for them for a bit. Where I volunteered doing their practical stuff, like raking on my first day, raking off a wildflower meadow, and doing all the practical stuff. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I got a job with them fundraising. So those annoying people from charities that stand outside shopping centres and go, hey, give us some money on a monthly basis. I did that for a year.
Hmm.
I got an award, Best New Recruiter, for just doing well, because I can talk to anybody, basically.
Yeah.
And then I did tree surgery for 8 months. So I was got my chainsaw license, did tree surgery on the ground. So, taking trees out of old ladies' back gardens who didn't want it shading their allotment. And I was like, you know what? I've taken a bit of a turn off what I wanted to do, because what I'm doing now doesn't matter. That's not,
Hmm.
I don't care about this. I don't care that it's shading your allotment. I'm not passionate about this. And I would very often get distracted by birds. And, the guy I worked for was like, Nat, come on. What are you doing? I was like, there's a bird over here. And he's just like, I don't care. Please come and do this work. Get all this stuff in the chipper. And then I got a woodland traineeship at the local wildlife trust because I moved to Wales. And then I was like, this is really cold. Because I was outside doing management for dormice. So they need quite a young understory dormice.
Hmm.
So we were taking down a lot of trees to thin the woodland out so that the younger saplings would come up and the dormice would have something to wander through. Repetitive. I got bored, which
Yeah.
is classic me. And then I started doing ecology because I'm good at report writing and stuff. And I got a job a year and a half ago now, just before the pandemic started. Someone actually gave me a job. So I was
That's
already doing sort of volunteer bat surveys, and I really liked bats because they're so mysterious. So I had a bat detector before when I was doing my old job, going on bat walks by myself. So
yeah.
it fit perfectly, and I've been doing that for a year and a half now, and gained my bat license, which you need in the UK. You need in England, there are different levels for what you can do. So I have a license to shine a torch at them. Basically, you can't even if you know a bat somewhere in the UK, you cannot look at it with a torch without a license. Like, it's really strict.
Really?
Yeah,
That
like
is fascinating.
I'm
Okay.
not allowed to touch bats unless it's care or under training without the next level of license. So I need to handle 8 different species or something like that. Someone would be like, oh, actually, it's this many, but whatever. You have to handle X amount of different species in order to get your level 2. And then you go up to trapping as the next level. So they are very, very protected over here. We love bats.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'd never so my wife worked at a wildlife rehab center for a while, or was an intern there for a while, about a year. Um, Maybe not quite that long. It doesn't matter. And I know when she was there, she was talking about how they needed different certifications to work with different animals, but it was like the bobcats or the some of the larger predators, and you have a rabies vaccine at X, Y, and Z. I had never really thought about that it's that stringent. So this is an aside. I worked for our extension service for about 4 years, and so I did community education kind of stuff in horticulture.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a woman call me one day, and she said, "Where can I buy bats?" And I said, "Like baseball bats?" Or she said, "No, like the animal." I was like, "I don't think you can buy bats. I don't think that's a thing." And she said, "Well, how do I get bats? I've got mosquitoes. I want them to eat the mosquitoes." And I said, "Well, they will do that." And I said, "You could put up a bat box and hope
Yeah.
for the best."
Mm-hmm.
We have Mexican freetail bats in our area. Not so much. Like, I see them very, very occasionally in the city, or I hear them more than I see them. But if you go about an hour and a half like northeast of where I am, there's an old train tunnel, and they have a 500,000 bat colony there, and you can go see the
Oh,
emergence and all that. It's pretty cool.
that's like the dream. All our bats are really small. Our biggest bat's probably about the size of a European blackbird. I don't know what the equivalent
Okay.
in the US is, but sort of doing this big.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're beautiful. I did see some big bats the other night, and it was just like, whoa, they're huge, because normally they are literally mouse size, just with big
Yeah.
wings. So it was nice to see. You sort of have big bat is like a description of
Hmm.
myotis species, which are really hard to differentiate in terms of sound and stuff like that. And you just sort of go, that's a big bat. It's things like noctules, different species is like, that's a big bat. We don't know which one, but it's big, one of the big boys.
That's a big one. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
but definitely not as
So
big as Mexican free-tailed bats. Big for
that's pretty
us.
interesting. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk plants a little bit. How did
Mhm.
you get into plants? You said that that's something that your family's kind of always done.
Yeah, it's like my other half's family.
Okay.
So my father-in-law is a landscape architect. He's had a landscape architect company for years, and he I think he won a competition for the Festival of Gardens in Portugal a couple of years ago as well. They go there. It's like they love going there, and they design like gardens, and they have a theme every year. And he won one year, which was really, really cool.
Wow.
He's very much like, the eco side of it, and making sure it's sustainable materials and things like that. And his dad was a gardener in like a big estate manor house, one of these huge, when they used to have loads of gardeners, and your job could be a gardener, because really at the minute for big estates and stuff like that, you're looking at the National Trust. There's not really a huge amount of big estate families anymore, really, that have on-site gardeners and stuff. So it's like the heyday. So we have about 100 bonsai, probably.
Oh, wow.
My other half and I have two. So two or three of them are mine, and the others are all Rob's, my other half. So most of them are in training baskets, so
Hmm.
they're not all old gnarly bonsai. A lot of them are in training because they take ages
Hmm.
to grow. I find it funny that a lot of people think that you can buy bonsai seeds, and I'm like, that's not a thing. I try and say to them, that's not a thing, and they've got a bonsai pot with like a green shoot coming out of it, and I was like, your grandkids are gonna see a cool bonsai,
Yeah,
not
maybe.
you. Yeah, so so they're all in the garden. That's one thing I want to say. They are not indoor plants unless they are tropical plants. Please leave them
Right.
outside, everybody. That's why they're dying. So you always have, I had
Yeah.
one and it died. And I'm like, because it's like supposed to be outside, it needs that rest over winter. You're bringing it inside and it gets tired. It lasts for a couple of years, and then it's just like, blam, I give up because I've not had my little snooze. over winter. So I have to say to people, leave it outside. Unless it's
That's such a
tropical,
good
like a
point.
ficus or something.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, and that's such a good point though, because the things that get sold as bonsai, I mean, and it may be different in the UK, but I see things like uh, grow a giant sequoia, a redwood, and I'm
I would
like,
love one.
that. Oh, me too. Oh, me
So
too.
send me one.
I had Yeah, I had bought seeds for and they didn't make it. We had an issue in the greenhouse, but I'd had seeds for bristlecone pine, so
Hmm.
Pinus longeva, and the giant redwood. And they got about an inch, and I'm what 4 centimeters tall, and then they died because someone
Yeah.
forgot to water for a while. That's okay, and that someone was this
Was
guy,
it you?
but that's
Yeah.
yeah. Because they were like back in a weird corner of the greenhouse at work, so nobody would mess with them,
Yeah.
and that included me. I forgot to go
Hmm.
water them and stuff, and so they died.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of these species, they're like, oh, you're gonna take a tree that's 100 meters tall and put it in
Hmm.
your kitchen. That doesn't
Yeah. I
like
mean, we
how it
have
work.
some redwoods.
Yeah,
We've got some dawn redwoods. I
cool.
did buy them from a garden centre. They were in a clump of 5 in one pot. But if you want them to get bigger, they will stay that size. If you want them to get
Yeah.
bigger, you need to give them more space to grow, and that's what people don't realise. A lot of stuff we plant in the ground until it gets to a size that we want, then
Oh,
we reduce it down, bare root it, and take some of the tap root out or whatever. It's a risk. It's always a risk, and you will always lose
sure.
things, but that's why you have loads. So that it's
Yeah.
not a big deal. My apple's looking very sad, my crab apple. We repotted it
Oh,
and we think it dried out. It's looking a bit sad, but we've got fingers crossed because it has tiny apples on it, like mini tiny little
that is
apples
cool.
that come off it, which is
That's
very
so
sweet.
cool. I
It
could
looks
do.
cute in
I
the
could.
autumn.
I could do a whole episode on bonsai, I think, and
Yes,
we might have to.
bonsais are very nice. We also have lots of other plants. Like I like roses, unless it doesn't smell. Who wants a rose that doesn't smell? Like I literally do not understand. But I like old style roses because new style roses don't let bees in. So
Right.
I really want them to be useful to bees. So I like the old style with the single sort of petal around the side. I
Yeah.
don't know what style they are. I just liked the look of them and they smell good. So I was like, I'll have that.
Yeah, more the wild type, and we used to have a big rose garden at work,
Mm.
actually two of them. And we had in one garden 60, 70 varieties of heirloom rose, and then probably a dozen in the other, and we had to pull them all out. We got a
Oh,
disease called rose rosette, and it's a
oh,
virus that causes weird growth. You get something called witch's broom. I don't know if you've seen that, but all the branches kind of cluster up at the edge of twigs.
hmm.
You're a tree person, so that's something you may have seen. But
It rings a bell.
but it looks like a broom, like the
Hmm.
stems do, and you get just weird growth, and it's spread by a mite. And so we talked to it's a bad. It came into the Texas actually has a big rose industry,
Hmm.
and we grow lots of roses in the eastern part of the state.
Hmm.
And that's uh 400 miles from me, and we're still in Texas. If that, I mean, that's a long ways. Um, so I say
It's
we
so big.
pretty loosely,
Yeah.
and but it came in there, and then it's kind of spread all over the state, and it's spreading all over the country, and it's a virus. There's nothing we can do about it, and
Hmm.
so we had to pull out close to 100 old roses, and it was very
Yeah.
sad.
We've got ash dieback in the UK.
Okay.
We had Dutch elm disease. That was a beetle that was
Hmm.
it's starting. I mean, it's basically taken out the vast majority of our elm trees. And now we've got ash dieback. If you guys are in the UK and you're driving around, just have a look at some of the ash trees. They've got keys on them, and they've long pointy leaves. Just have a look at the tops, and you'll start to see just dead at the top. So it starts at the top of the branches and works its way back. And I can't. It's very rare now that you'll find an ash tree without ash dieback. It's a fungus, I think. I think it goes on the wind.
Hmm.
And a lot of the wildlife trusts have been managing it by dropping loads of the ash trees, taking them down, leaving them in situ, and not spreading it. And it's a big sort of problem here. So I mean, I guess it goes in cycles and stuff like that happens, but we'd like to keep some of our ashes. Please,
Oh
ash
yeah, yeah.
dieback.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
so.
no, and this is that is interesting. In talking about the and I sort of want to start getting into your podcast and what what our topic is for today. So the history
Mhm,
of gardens, but thinking about the how do I put this? I guess the changes in canopy in any given area, right? Like you
mhm,
say, it's a cycle. There are diseases that come in, and unfortunately, sometimes the more we manage, the worse that gets. I think
mhm,
of chestnut blight in the U.S., where through sort of the Appalachian Trail, that may not mean anything to you specifically, but through Georgia and parts of sort of the central eastern U.S.,
mhm.
it was like 75% chestnut canopy through there, and chestnut blight came in and wiped out most of the American chestnut.
That's
And
crazy.
so through time we see that canopy cover plant species or plant ecosystems and populations evolve and change based on predation and all of these things. And I think that has direct impacts on the societies that live in these areas. It changes
Mhm,
the way we interact with the environment and all of that, which I think kind of brings us into your podcast across the ages, not specifically, but you talk about history and you talk about our different civilizations and the ways that we have interacted with each other. And then today we're going to talk about how we interacted with plants. So, how did that
yes.
start? Where did that come from?
So, I mean, I tried to have a little look. I was looking like all the way back at like Neanderthal or Neanderthal. I'm not quite sure how you say it. I've heard people say both. So let's go for Neanderthal, I guess. Doesn't really matter. People know what I'm talking about. And it starts with food, really. When does something stop becoming just I'm planting this because I need it for food and it means I don't have to go out and forage? And when does it become, hey, I'm doing this because I enjoy being
Hmm.
near this plant and I enjoy having this shade and I enjoy, the smell of this thing. And I think it's quite hard to pin down that really. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of years BC, really.
Hmm.
But what I have done is sort of started at the Egyptians, at ancient Egypt, which, does span quite, I think it's like 300 BCE. Like all the way into just after sort of the first centuries, as in AD or CE or whatever you want to call it. I had quite a nice little quote. I couldn't actually. I've noted the quote down, but I didn't find who said the quote. So you have to. I did try and like retrospectively find like who said this because it's a really good quote, but I couldn't find it. But the quote is: there are two kinds of garden: the truly utilitarian one of fruit and vegetables meant to provide food for a family, and the restful pleasure garden designed to nourish one's soul. So they do cross over massively,
Hmm.
but I kind of wanted to focus a bit more on the one that's not purely food production, and one that is just about, hey, I want to sit in this garden because this garden's really nice, so let's make a really nice outdoor space. So what does an Egyptian garden look like? But the primary function from what I've seen is that it's for shade
Okay, that makes
because
sense. Yeah.
Egypt's hot. So
Yeah.
shade for comfort and water for irrigation. So the reason we know so much about Egyptian gardens is because they love a tomb. The Egyptians love a tomb. They love painting. They love painting stuff on frescoes on the walls of tombs. And so that's what gives us the knowledge of what they looked like and the sort of being able to figure out what sort of plants they had. So thank you, ancient Egyptians, for painting on
Yeah.
walls. So I don't know whether have you heard of the Fertile Crescent?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's that sort of area like around the Nile, basically. And hang on, I don't want to say the other river's name because I always get it wrong. It's like the Euphrates or something. I can't remember what it's
Uh,
called.
Euphrates,
Thank
probably.
you. See, I said it completely wrong. It's because I read a lot and don't, say it out loud a lot. But basically, the argument is that is the birth of civilization in that area. The reason is because those waters create a really fertile place to grow things in, which then means that people didn't have to work really hard to get their food production. That then means that they've got time to do more difficult things, more thinking and stuff like that. They're not wasting time going out hunting, gathering and all of that and really finding it tough to till the soil and stuff. It's just like, boom, here's some grain. Go and think about stuff. So the Nile, so the Nile was kicking out fertile soil left, right and center. So, they had time specifically to gardens. They had time to go and do nice things like gardens, because it wasn't such a drudge. Their life wasn't such a drudgery. Yeah, they actually had time to do nice things. And let's be honest, we're talking about rich people because let's just say it now. I'm talking about rich people like throughout this when I'm talking about gardens and stuff, because just like everywhere, the people on the lowest income in society are the ones that work the hardest, which as is now, and haven't got time to be doing things like gardens. So I'm just saying that now. We're talking about rich people. So so the Egyptian garden starts with a wall. It's an enclosed. Okay. They were enclosed gardens, wall gardens, which is like the dream. So it keeps the riffraff out. Don't want any of those poor people getting into our garden, do we now, Egyptians? We also keeps the wild animals out, because in Egypt, obviously, you've got stuff like, hippos. You don't want a hippo coming in and smashing all your plants. That would be very sad and a lot of work for the poor gardener. So, yes, we start with a wall, and also the desert winds. Pretty cold at night, I should think. So, it keeps the plants protected from, sandstorms and all of that stuff. So there's also a pond. They love a pond. So it's a pond, a well, or a canal. So that's where the water comes from the, the water source. Because, if there wasn't a canal that you'd managed to pump from the Nile to your garden, which they did do, which I'll go into in a second, then you've got, some poor sod dragging up water from the Nile every hour, probably, it's so hot.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, so they also had these things. I'm going to try and find it shaduf. I'm sure I'm saying that correctly, where they use that to get water out of wells and ponds and stuff. So, okay, so think of like a jar, like an old style jar with a point on the bottom, made of terracotta or whatever. That was on like a really long pole. And then they just use the thing and dunk it in and bring the pole up so they're not bending and stuff. So they still use them now, apparently, in Egypt to get water, which is really cool. They had trees, flowers, vegetables. Do you think of like an Egyptian garden as being really formal and geometric? What do you reckon?
I'm trying. I would not think so. I would think it would be more, because when that pops into my head, I think of like from movies and stuff, like a little oasis along the Nile in the desert where you see like just trees and plants and animals and all those kinds of things. That's what pops into my head.
Yeah, I always thought like geometric gardens come from like 18th century England, the rose gardens, blah, 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 blah. No, we're wrong. The Egyptians did.
Wow, okay.
Much like the Egyptians did everything. The Egyptians created the geometric garden, and they were very like linear and geometric and symmetrical, and they liked rows of fig trees and, things like that. So the most complete plan of a villa that we have access to and its surrounds. So that was discovered in a tomb that belonged to a very important man, which is why he had a tomb, in the reign of Amenhotep III. So we're talking like between 1411 and 1375 BCE. So a while ago.
Yeah.
So he, as I said, about the canal, like he had a mile-long canal coming from the Nile that brought, water to his really fancy villa. So it's time to talk about plants, because that's what we're here for. So we're talking trees for days. Trees. they love trees, and generally they were fruit trees because why have a tree that doesn't produce fruit when you can have a tree that
Sure.
produces fruit? So what
Yeah.
trees do you think you'll find in an Egyptian garden?
Well, you mentioned figs, so I'm going to cheat on that one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think what would grow in that area. Again, this is probably showing some of my biases from modern agriculture, but I think things like olives and dates
Mm-hmm.
and pomegranates, maybe,
Yeah.
and um, maybe some. Just thinking of the climate, maybe some other pomes like apples and pears and those kinds of things. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you are the plant guy. You are the plant prof. So that's exactly right. So date palms. Apparently, there are two types of figs. I'm just like, I don't know, sycamore figs and common figs.
Hmm.
Pomegranates. I've got apple. I presume pears. I've not written that anywhere, but if there's apples, there's pears, right?
Right.
Horseradish I've written, but horseradish is not a tree. Horseradish is like a little plant, but I've sort of got that
Yeah.
under food production.
Okay.
The pomegranate specifically, so pomegranates do feature in so much culture, I suppose, like through time. But for Egyptians
Hmm.
specifically, they're said to symbolize death, longevity, paradise, and temptation. So in ancient
Mm.
Egypt, pomegranates were buried with the dead to aid their passage to the afterlife. So, a lot of these things had religious significance as well. No one seems to just have something just because they go, hey, I've got that because I like it. It's just like, hey, this has this significance and it's really deep. And,
Oh
it's
yeah.
just like, hey, I just like pomegranate. I had a pomegranate for the first time the other day. I'd never had a
Oh
pomegranate.
really? What'd you think?
No, it was really nice. It pops and the little
Huh?
seeds go boop, which was really
Yeah.
nice. And I text my friend. I was like, "How do I get these damn seeds out? Like, I've just got no idea." And I ended up just like clawing them out with my hand. She was like, "There's
Yeah.
a really easy way you can do this." I was like, "Oh, okay." So
It is
next
a
time,
challenge. It is a
yeah.
challenge. So that's actually my wife's favorite fruit, and they're fairly easy to get here. We get them pretty commonly. They grow actually fairly well in our climate.
Mm.
Our climate here where I am is actually not too different in some ways than the area of the world that you're talking about, Mediterranean. We're dry, it's hot. Our
Mm-hmm.
winters are probably a little bit colder, but pomegranates are fairly cold tolerant. They grow in the mountains in Afghanistan, and
Oh
they're
wow.
native to that part of the world. And I don't know if you've ever read the book the Kite Runner.
Nope.
It's a little depressing. It's good, but it's a little depressing. But they talk about it. It's set in Afghanistan, and they talk about like the kids throwing pomegranates at each other, which I think would hurt. That's a
It
big, like
would. They are
heavy,
solid,
hard fruit.
like a
Yeah,
baseball size, aren't they? They're quite big.
yeah, they're big.
Yeah.
But no, that's interesting. Uh, yeah, that's a good one. I'm a big fan of pomegranates.
Yeah, like I'll be having them more since they're so important to so many cultures. I'll have them.
Hey, let's take a quick break, and then we will come back and talk lots more history. Well, hey, welcome to the mid-roll. It's been a couple episodes since I've done one of these, but this was a long episode, and I thought we could use a break right in the middle. Also, I remembered to do it, so there's that as well. How are y'all doing? Are y'all good? I hope you're good. So, not a whole lot to talk about today, except to remind you to go check out Planthropology in all the places. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter as Planthropology, or some related version of that. Type it in. It's Anthropology with a PL slapped on the front, and look for the bristlecone pine, and that'll be me. I post a lot of stuff from plant tips and tricks, or as some friends apparently like to say, nightmare fuel, whatever. It doesn't matter. I have fun. And I can promise you won't be bored. So go follow on social media and connect with all things Planthropology. Also, you can find me and whatever was left of my self-respect on the TikTok machine as @theplantprof. And I post other, plant-related nonsense on there. If you want to support the show, head over to patreon.com/planthropology. And there's no pressure at all to do that. But if you would like to help out, you are more than welcome to. Gosh, what else? I don't know. There's probably other stuff I can talk about, but I just want to get back to this episode. This is a great episode, and I want you to hear more of it. But before we do that, I have a trailer for you, a promo from my podcast network, or the podcast network I'm part of, the Podfix Network. And hey, we're playing fantasy football. It's fun. It's Dungeons and Dragons for jocks. I'm not a jock, I'm a nerd, but it's just a different kind of nerdy, and I love it. I love fantasy football. So, you need to listen to this show. It is going out through Podfix Presents, which is the network show. And every week we'll be talking about how things went in the past week of Podfix Fantasy Football. And it's a lot of fun. It's silly. It's going to be ridiculous. I'm sure there'll be lots of smack talking, probably mostly from me. And so that's something that you want to listen to. So let's listen to a quick trailer, and then we will get back into talking about the history of gardens with Natalie Sabin.
All new to the Podfix Network, it's the Podfix Football Federation. Catch all the edge of your seat football action is fantasized about amongst 8 shows on our network. Each week we'll look back at the results, talk to the teams, and prophesize the future like the all-knowing mediums we are. Follow along and root for your favorite squad by subscribing to Podfix Presents, the only place to listen to and then yell at your listening device about how we were wrong, even though you know we can't hear you. The Podfix Football Federation Weekly. It's a hole in one.
When Egyptians, I'm sort of moving on to flowers slightly. When we talk about the Egyptian lotus, we are not talking about the Indian lotus, sort of in that sort of what you would commonly think of a lotus. This is a different type of lotus. So it's really blue and white water lilies is what we're talking about. So that's in Egyptian artwork quite a lot, and in their gardens a lot. So those specific lilies are sacred to the goddess Isis, and they're used in people's hair, on banquet tables, carved into the tops of columns. Like, they liked it, and they say lotus, but it's not lotus in the same, vein as over in India, and I think China. I want to say China. I'm like, yeah, China as well. So they really loved flowers for the sake of flowers as well. So they did employ men, women, and children as gardeners to keep the flowers looking nice. So not only did they look nice, they used them quite a lot. So the gardeners would also be responsible for making garlands for religious and social activities. So beautiful. I want the flower necklaces. So you're talking things like, it's like, why don't we wear more like flower garlands? Like, please, I want them. So these would have had cornflower, false saffron. I don't know what that is. You can probably tell me what that looks like, but I've never heard of that.
False saffron. There's some kind of crocus, I guess. Because the saffron is a crocus flower. It's a little cup shaped, really pretty little flower, cute little flower. Mm-hmm. But then there's 2 or 3 other species of it that don't produce the little threads that people, spend far too much time pulling out and charging incredible amounts of money for.
Oh, that's sad.
So that's interesting. They're pretty flowers.
Yeah. Well, there's mallow and corn poppy. They've all been found in tombs. So I think I had something about Tutankhamun, which we all love. There we go. Yeah. Archaeologists found that Tutankhamun's innermost coffin had been decorated with a floral collar made from numerous flower petals sewn together. So, obviously a really important pharaoh, goes with, that's how important, flowers were to people. He's being buried with them. And tomb paintings show offering of foodstuffs and garden produce as well. So vegetables, fruit. Like, do you guys have Harvest Festival in the US, or is it just like a UK? Yeah, so it's just like, here's a Harvest Festival. Yeah. Here's like loads of vegetables and fruit. So they were taking those into the afterlife, and then they had garlands and crowns. There were even like court florists. That was their job, to be a florist, to make sure that everything was adorned pretty with flowers. And they were seen to honor the gods as well, which is nice. Flowers are lovely. Do you want to hear an ancient Egyptian love poem?
Yeah,
I've got one.
Totally.
It is, I am thy beloved. I am for thee like a garden, which I have planted with flowers and sweet smelling herbs. So, that's that sort of, gardens are love, like, because they are just such beautiful things that people hold very, very dear. I do think we're losing that slightly, but I'll pick up on that a little bit later. I've got some descriptions of a couple of gardens specifically.
Okay.
So a 5th dynasty tomb at Saqqara, which you're talking 2,500 BC. So older than the last ones. So they show the irrigation and cultivation of lettuce, which apparently was a sacred plant. So and an illustration of watering vegetable patches in the garden. That is thousands of years ago. Another tomb records that someone was granted land property of 200 cubits long and 200 cubits wide, enclosed by a wall, equipped and planted with useful trees. A very large pond is to be made in it, and fig trees and vines are to be planted, approximately equal to 9 tennis courts. So, well, obviously that's our modern, gives us, I don't think they had tennis. Maybe I'd assume not. So basically this was too large a space just to grow vegetables, but too small a space to be growing loads of grain. So that's sort of explaining that, definitely for pleasure. And an Egyptian tomb paintings in the 16th century BCE are some of the earliest physical evidence of ornamental horticulture and landscape design. So it shows lotus ponds surrounded by symmetrical rows of acacias and palms. So very, again, with the lines. Do you want to hear something about Queen Hatshepsut?
Yeah.
I find this hard to say every time I say it, and I have practiced, I promise. But Queen Hatshepsut.
I have no idea how to say it, so I'm just...
Yeah. So 1470 BCE. So she bought 31 frankincense trees with their roots balled up in baskets from Somalia to decorate her table in Thebes, but they did not survive. So, people have been importing plants, like exotic plants, I say with bunny ears, from thousands and thousands of miles away since the early ancient Egyptian times.
Wow.
It's a rich person to say, hey, we don't have that here. Yeah, you, God knows how many, I presume, slaves, go and fetch these, trees, frankincense trees, and I'll have them in my house. They died.
Yeah.
All the trees died.
That's really sad for a lot of reasons.
It is sad, yeah. But it was just sort of nice that people obviously have, that's an exotic tree from this place and it's from far away, and that's been happening for thousands of years by the looks of it, for people to show off that they've got exotic things from different countries. So that
brings an interesting point about the way that we look at antiquity, I think, and the peoples of those times. I think there's an important point here that people are people, and that we've been, quote unquote, that way for our entire history. So we look at some of the weird things that people do today and we're like, oh, that's, blah, blah, blah. Now, people are people. And I think when we look at ancient peoples and when we look at history and look at the historical context, we try to divorce our own feelings and ambitions and things from that. And we can't do that. And I think it's that for some reason, for me, that sticks in my head as something that's very important when we think about this.
Yeah, they're often seen as they are different. They are past and they lived a different life, and they, didn't have time to have the same cruxes and worries that we do. But they have the root, and wanting to show off and, wanting things and wanting to be rich and blah, 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 blah. So, I always forget, and then I read something and I go, of course she bloody had those trees. Of course she had them over from Somalia, and wanted to show off. And of course they died and it was all a waste of money, but it didn't matter because she was rich, so it was fine.
Right.
So yeah, that's a nice reminder. I just move on to ancient Mesopotamia. I didn't realize this. Have you heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon?
I have, actually. Yeah, it's fascinating.
I'm the only one that had never heard of this. So I was reading it. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is amazing. And I said to my other half, who generally doesn't tend to know popular culture references and stuff. I'll always say, oh, this program or this singer. And he'll be like, who? And I was like, have you heard of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon? He was like, yes. I was like, why is it just me that doesn't know what these things are? I'm supposed to be this history person and also like wildlife. But just for those people who haven't heard about them, I'm going to tell you about it. So I will start with a disclaimer. There is no evidence that this actually existed.
Right.
Okay, so there's no documentation in the Babylonian sources that they ever existed. There's no solid archaeological evidence that they existed either. So I think they did because it's nice for me to think they did. Therefore, I think they
Same.
did.
I agree. Yeah.
You know. So this was King Nebuchadnezzar. Does that Nebuchadnezzar ring a bell for you at all?
It does. It does for me. Yeah.
I was like, hey, I know that name.
Mm-hmm.
So any, I guess, millennials and older who have watched The Matrix, the ship from the Morpheus's ship is called the Nebuchadnezzar.
Mm-hmm.
So that is called the Nebuchadnezzar after Nebuchadnezzar II. So this guy was said to have troubling dreams that he couldn't remember. So in Matrix Reloaded, which I think is I want to say it's the second one. It could be the third one.
Yeah, it's the second one.
Yeah. Morpheus quotes the Bible when the Nebuchadnezzar is destroyed, when the ship's destroyed. Sorry for spoilers. It's worth a watch. I've dreamed a dream, but now that dream is gone from me. So the reason why that is relevant is that the story about Nebuchadnezzar in the Babylonian gardens is that he had them built for his wife, Amethyst. So she lived in Media. I'm not sure where that was, but it wasn't in Babylonia, who missed the lush landscape of her hometown. So, you know, she really missed the beautiful, lush landscape. And so he created these Babylonian hanging gardens. So close your eyes, people, because this is how you're going to imagine it. So you've got multi-level terraces with plants hanging down. So think of like, you know, when you see like a post-apocalyptic film and the plants have overtaken the skyscraper. It's kind of like that, but a bit more tiered into a sort of, you know, triangular-ish shape, I think. And basically all of the terraces are just covered in trees. And you've got little waterfalls and things like that. So it looks like from a distance that it's a mountain landscape hanging in midair. So it's on the banks of the Euphrates. There you go. Yeah. It's on the banks of the Euphrates River. It was said to have been built around 600 BCE. So that's modern day Iraq as we know it now. And they were described by Herodotus. So Herodotus was a Greek historian, and he described it as one of the 7 ancients of the modern world because it was just something that was unknown, this like incredible engineering feat with complex irrigation systems. So the terraces were supported by these like huge columns. The columns were filled with soil. So then that meant that the roots of the trees could then, you know, go down into columns rather than obviously be really shallow roots and fall over. So the sort of trees that they had larch, acacia, cypress, cedar, aspen, chestnut, birch, poplar, fruit trees. These aren't small trees. The fruit trees are probably quite small, but, you know, these aren't small trees. So the fact that they could keep these trees alive on, you know, not in the ground, essentially, I suppose, in pots, but what you would, you know, describe as a pot, you know, a potted plant is just incredible. So there were loads of fountains. And if the gardens actually existed, it would take 8,200 gallons of water a day to keep the plants alive. Now, I'm not very good at this sort of thing, but that sounds like a lot.
A lot.
That sounds like a lot of water. You know, we've not got electricity. You know, we've not got like really good pressured, you know, hoses and stuff. So, you know, this would have been insane. The gardens were about 75 feet high. So for the Brits, that's 22 meters high. Large. They were large.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So the water would have had to be carried up or transported to the top of the gardens by irrigation system and then obviously made its way down. A lot of historians, as I said, believe they don't exist, but they're wrong. That they've been destroyed by contamination, a combination of earthquakes, war, and erosion. So apparently it's quite an earthquakey area. That's a real word, an earthquakey area. So yeah, so it's cool. I mean, the word hanging gardens really means overhanging. Like they mean overhanging rather than hanging, because they're not hanging under stuff. They're like hanging over the terraces. What I found really surprising was that when I started looking into the hanging gardens, everyone seems to know about it. You can get it on Minecraft. Like it's
Really?
like a mod on Minecraft. Like there's a mod on Skyrim for the hanging gardens. There's a mod on like the Sims for it.
Huh.
And I was just like, where have I been? Like I'm a gamer as well, and I've never seen or heard of the hanging gardens. So that's the
fascinating.
hanging gardens. They're very cool. And there's a lot of illustrations out there which really helps visualize it, but it just looks like a beautiful thing. So I'd like to believe that it's real, really. So
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I always, when I learned it the first time, and I don't, goodness, who knows when that was, probably in college, I took a history of landscape architecture course, and I'm pretty sure I slept through most of it. I was not a good student. I've never been a good student. But that was one of the things we talked about a little bit. And in that context, it was presented as here is a real, historical landscape thing. But no, since then I have read, like you say, that, maybe they existed, maybe they didn't. But I'm like you, I like to think they did. It's a good, interesting
It's nice
story.
to have something nice to think about history, because obviously it is rife with the real. You get smacked by the realism of it, really, where, a lot of stuff gets ruined because you're like, oh, hey, well, that was probably because of slave labor. And it's like, oh, no.
Yeah.
No, that's sad. A little snippet on Persians. So trees became so important in Persia that youths were taught to plant and cultivate them at the same time they learned to forge armor. So,
Interesting.
very important in ancient Persia. I've got there's someone, the Spartan general Lysander, who joined Cyrus as a mercenary. So there was a guy who was called Cyrus the Younger, who was ruling Persia. We're talking 5th century BCE, so sort of 600, 400. I always get them the way around.
I don't know which way that goes either.
Yeah, I can't, because it's BCE, I'm like getting confused. But 5th century BCE, you can work it out yourself. So Cyrus and this Spartan general were, conquering something or other, as usual. But a mercenary reported to someone else how Persian kings excelled in not only war, but also in gardening, creating paradisios, so paradises, where they collected plants, especially fruit-bearing trees. So everybody likes plants, as I just keep coming back to. Everybody likes plants. Got a little bit about roses. You'd like to hear about, the history about roses. This sort of spans over quite a lot of cultures, obviously. So wild roses were used in the production of rose water. So rose water, scented oils, other fragrances, long before they were cultivated. So many uses can be traced back to Iraq, so Babylonia, in 2000 BCE. So deliberate of cultivation of roses was well underway in China by 500 BCE. And, people like the Romans and other early European civilizations also grew them for commercial uses, because who doesn't like a nice smelling rose? The Romans, who are always extra, filled their swimming pools, filled their swimming baths and fountains with rose water. They set out carpets on rose petals for their feasts and orgies. So roses were also used as confetti for celebrations, for medicinal purposes, and a source of perfume. One Roman emperor used to enjoy showering his guests with rose petals, which tumbled down the ceiling, which is nice. I have got a little snippet that which actually goes back to what we said earlier about how all this nice stuff ends up being quite sad. And there were some people who ended up, the poor people growing roses had to grow roses and not grow their own food, because they were forced to supply the demand, in ancient Rome for roses, and ended up, not having enough food and stuff because they were growing roses. Yeah. So it says they became synonymous with the worst excesses of the Roman Empire, when the peasants were reduced to growing roses instead of food in order to satisfy the demands of, hey, I've got a very important party. Do kids need food? Don't need it. I need
Not
roses.
important.
So, yeah. So,
wow. Okay.
We've got the earliest actual depiction of a rose comes from 1450 BCE in Greece. So, roses, very, very, very popular. Yeah.
They have been throughout time, and they still are. There's still a huge commercial, horticulture thing, from cut roses to landscape roses and sort of everything in between.
Yes, they're very popular. I've got one last Roman to talk about. Nero.
Okay.
Quite a popular, I think he's quite a well-known Roman emperor. So he's the 1st century. He was knocking about, being evil and stuff. So he had this massive palace called the Golden House. So it should be on like a modern day episode of Cribs. Like, I don't think Cribs is going anymore. That probably shows my age. But like an episode of Cribs, like Nero's Golden House would like top every other thing like on there. Like, so it wasn't just the house. It was a massive park, this huge, huge park. So it had pavilions, baths, fountains. He had a huge artificial lake, which they'd go on boats on this massive lake.
Wow.
And so he had wild parties. I mean, Nero was one of Rome's most like notorious emperors. Like he literally set fire to an entire section of Rome so that he could build this house. He was a nice man. Yeah, so it was a technical marvel, really. So it had domes, revolving ceilings, ornamental fountains. It had waterfalls coming down the walls. There was a huge 30-meter high bronze statue of himself and the gardens covered 125 acres.
Wow.
So I think that's quite a lot. Sounds a lot.
That's quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So where it was, a lot of you might have been to, like the Colosseum in Rome is on that spot. So the next emperor, Vespasian, that's a hard word, because Nero was so hated, the palace and the gardens weren't up long, because when the next emperor came along, they were like, get a bulldozer to that flat and we're going to build the Colosseum. So the Colosseum was built in the 1st century AD and it's called the Colosseum. Oh, this is a nice little fact. So it actually acquired its name from that giant bronze statue that he'd commissioned of himself to resemble the Colossus at Rhodes, which was one of the 7 wonders of the world, of the ancient world at the time. So that's where the Colosseum got its name, from his like massive, like, I'm great, here's a statue of me. So
that's fascinating. I had no idea. That's really cool.
Yeah, so the Colosseum's really cool. You should go and see it if you can. It's very, very nice. I like it a lot. It was weird to be there because it's just like you've seen it on a million pictures. So to go around was just like, oh my god, it was very, very good.
So? Random question. So that is it as big as it looks like on TV? Because when they make it, a lot of things are disappointing when you go and see them because you're like, this is a third of the size that I thought it was.
Yeah, no, it is huge. I think the only thing that disappointed me was it was so busy. We had a tour guide and she talked into a little microphone and then you had to hold like this little walkie-talkie style thing like up to your ear and we couldn't really hear what she was saying. And like in England and in the UK, you go around a museum and you can go around by yourself. You don't need a tour guide because there's plaques everywhere in 3 or 4 different languages that tell you everything you need to know and are really detailed. They don't have that in the Colosseum. It was really weird. Like I was just like, you cannot go on your own without a tour guide because there's just like, I didn't find any of these little boards that tells you everything. But Pompeii was a fantastic tour, but you do have to go and see them both.
Cool. Yeah, I would really like to.
Yeah, I would recommend it. It is nice. You just try and avoid everyone trying to sell you everything on the street all the time. It's like any capital city. Everyone's like, "Do you want to buy this? Do you want to buy this?" No, thank you. Bye. So I got a bit on Japan and China. So both Chinese and Japanese gardens traditionally is to evoke the natural landscape of mountains and rivers. But what differs between China and Japan is Chinese gardens were intended to be viewed from within the garden, whereas Japanese gardens are intended to be viewed from within the house.
Interesting. Okay.
Which I'd never thought of, or it's just such a strange concept to, you think that it's to be in the garden, but, depending on what culture it is. So I found that really cool that they are similar. You sort of say an Oriental garden, but, they did have slightly differing, I'm sure they all merge, take tastes from each other. But it's like Chinese gardens included a water feature, but Japanese gardens set in a wetter climate would get by with the suggestion of water. So things like sand or pebbles raked into a wave pattern, that classic little rake and sand. And so I found that really interesting. So stepping stones, in Japanese gardens, stepping stones are placed into groupings to be part of the landscape. But then in a Chinese garden, a particular choice stone might be placed on a pedestal in a prominent location. So it's like, hey, look at this really pretty stone. It's very nice. Everybody come and look at it, rather than stepping all over it. So only a little section on Japan and China. But I think everybody can kind of imagine what they look like quite easily, really. So I didn't want to go over that too much.
Yeah.
Got a little section on Mesoamerica.
Okay.
Little small section. So Mesoamerican cultures, you've got the Mayans and Aztecs. So obviously there are more cultures in that area, but I'm going to focus on these two. So they both had practical and aesthetic gardening traditions. So the Maya had extensive use of forest gardens for food and medicinal plant production, and had these within their cities as well. The Aztec elite built elaborate pleasure gardens in the Valley of Mexico. So these had things like loads of different types of plants, as well as water features and aqueduct-fed fountains. So the Aztecs were having, aqueduct-fed stuff. Everyone loves an aqueduct. Yeah. So specifically for both of them, they had a strong focus on fertility. So they were primarily agriculturally focused. So as well as that, the Aztecs had a strong love of flowers. So they put a lot of religious and metaphorical significance on them. So there's a lot of parallels that you can see from, a lot of cultures that wouldn't necessarily have known about the other ones. And it just goes to sort of show what flowers and plants invoke in people, which is just, I was trying to put my finger on it when I was doing a lot of research, and I was writing a lot of the notes up whilst I was sat in the garden. Mm-hmm. Because we've got a little terrace where I sit on the in-laws terrace, and I've got roses on one side, and then we've got wisteria and clematis going up the side of the house, and you've got bees buzzing around and stuff. And I was really trying to put my finger on what it is about gardens that cause so much joy, and I just couldn't quite go, hey, it's this one thing, but then I'm sat there really relaxed. So there's something about them.
Well,
really.
It's like, our species grew up, evolved in nature. We throughout time, if you look at a lot of these ancient cultures, they had a very different take on and it's interesting to have this discussion because you look at some of the Mesopotamian cultures, and they did take all these things and put them in walls and put them in their cities, but they were, again, people are people, and people have been people. But I feel like over time, and I think you mentioned that you had some notes on this a little bit too, that we have gone from that, say, Japanese and Chinese style of, you go in the garden and it's like you're walking through the mountains, and they're recreating nature in maybe a small scale or in a manageable scale. And we have gone to this place where we try to bend nature to our will in the landscape and in the garden. And what are your thoughts on that as a modern person that lives in whatever year this is?
Yeah, I mean, gardening goes through God knows how many styles. I mean, me personally, I prefer a wild air garden. I stopped my research at the medieval period because you start, for me, to get a little bit polished, a little bit too polished, and a little bit really shaped and really boring, for lack of a better term. Boring. My in-laws decorate landscape in quite a wild manner, and there's all sorts of, and I put quote unquote weeds everywhere. And I think it is fashion, and I will sort of touch back on this a little bit later about how we are moving into more of a relaxed, hey, I want to feel like I'm out in a wood, or I want to feel like I'm not, like, we don't want really short lawns and stuff. It's more, you just want to feel like you're outside. And I think that's a huge thing that the pandemic has reminded people, not everybody, because everybody, some people already knew this, but the we were locked down and we were only allowed to go for a 30-minute walk a day during
Oh,
like
wow.
the worst like part of it, unless you're an essential worker, so health workers, people who work in the building industry and stuff like that. Everybody else was made to stay home, and you were only allowed to leave your house for food shopping and going out for 30-minute daily exercise. So
Wow.
we're lucky in that we live in a place called the Wye Valley, which is basically between England and Wales. We're on the Welsh side, where we live in a beautiful place. So I have, a kilometre of woodland 2 minutes from the front door. Like I can see it now, where I can just go for a walk. And we saw a huge increase of people coming for walks and going past. And we could see the riverbank on the other side and people going on the Offers Dyke path, which is a big old walking path that a lot of hikers do. And I think people are just getting more in touch with how important wild landscapes are, and perhaps trying to mimic that in their gardens. I don't want stagnant things and really short borders and really neat borders. Sorry, it's just gross. It's just boring, isn't it? Like I just like a bit more wild stuff. So that's my view on it. Hey, you do you. People can do whatever they want, and that's fine. But do give a little bit of less mowing a go, and don't get so bothered about what the neighbours are thinking about how long your grass is. It's your grass. It's no one else's grass. If you don't want to mow the grass, don't mow the grass. So go on.
No, I was just going to say, I love that, because I don't know if this is a phenomenon where you live, but we have something in the U.S. called the Homeowners Association, which is not a cult, but like it's you sign up for and I'm lucky to not live in a neighborhood that has one, but it's like you can plant this and this, and you have to manage it this way, or we're going to fine you, and it's absurd.
Yeah, I have a neighbor who does not like how our garden is, and it's such a weird house because they have to basically walk through our garden and past our front door to get to their house. So I was sat on the terrace once on like doing something, and I just said, "Oh, hi, neighbor name," insert generic neighbor name. I was like, "Oh, hi." And I was just like, he said, "Oh, I didn't see you there." And I said, "Yeah, we grow these roses quite tall just to give us a little bit of privacy." And he said, "Oh, I remember when this used to be really neat here." And I was like, "Oh." I was like, because it's like, it's like my in-laws, like suddenly you just think I'm just going to moan about my in-laws, like, and he's always out with his strimmer and, all the power tools to keep stuff really short and stuff. And he just looks at it and says, mess.
Right.
This is a mess. For me, it's full of life. There's caterpillar pupae in here. There's cockchafers, and there's everything. There's bees. It's absolutely buzzing. Like, yes, we didn't plant that. It's appeared from somewhere, but hey, the bees are on it. So it's fine, but for a lot of people, that weed that's now got a really nice flower on, they wouldn't have waited until it got to that point where they can see it's got a flower. It would have been out straight away. So, boo, let people have wild gardens. I've seen people on Twitter post like passive aggressive notes that they've had from people mentioning that their garden's a mess and that they should tidy up and they're lazy. And it's just like, look, you do what you want with your house. I will do what I want with my house, and we will carry on and we will wave at each other.
When you go past. You don't have to be friends. Let's just be civil.
Just wave. Yeah, I've got a little section on medieval. That's sort of as far as I went. As I said, because I got bored. I mean, the main medieval gardens are for food production. And they started in monasteries. So the kitchen gardens, infirmary gardens. So you got things for herbs for the patients and stuff like that, and healing things, and vineyards. The monks love some wine. It says that they also might have had a green court, so a plot of grass where trees and where horses could graze. A cellarer's garden, so that's the food. That's the food guy. The cellar is the cellar is the food guy, and private gardens for fancy folk that would stop by. So you'd get, kings and lords staying at monasteries. So if you wanted to attract them, and with them came money and donations, then you would have to have a nice garden for them to come and stay in. But really, lots of different plots, raised beds with loads of food in, really was the gist of medieval gardens. So, and then also the rich people had these huge deer parks for hunting. So, you know, I mean, you say parks, really, it's just a load of grassland, you know, with a bit of forest, you know, that they can, you know, run around and shoot various things with their bow and arrows. But yeah, that was the I'm sure there's so much more about medieval gardens. I just lost interest, really.
I hear you.
To be
Yeah.
honest, I was just like, hey, this isn't exotic, this isn't exciting, this isn't different. I know this, so it's just like, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
I wanted to highlight a little bit about religion and gardens, which is something I came across because I was reading half of the stuff I sort of got from a book, 2 or 3 different books that my father-in-law gave me because he has a million books on gardens and garden design. And I was like, hey, do you have any like history of gardens design? He was like, here's 5. So these big, huge, thick books from probably like, you know, like the 90s or whatever, all on things, which was really nice. It gave me a nice little, you know, hey, here's the order. So in Christianity and Judaism, you've got the Garden of Eden. So obviously Adam and Eve in this very beautiful garden. In Islam, heaven and paradise is a garden. So when they talk about going to paradise after death, it's a garden. Like, you know, yeah. So the day of judgment will take place in the garden of pleasure. So, you know, the idea of paradise for Christianity, Judaism, Islam are all a garden, whatever garden it is, whoever, you know, whether it's Eden or whatever, it's a garden. You've got sacred groves. So in ancient India, Greece, Rome, China, and Japan, they had sacred groves that, you know, could not be chopped down. Sacred trees are important in Celtic, Germanic Europe, and they're still important in India. So trees holding this, you know, sacred power, and actually still, you know, yeah, in Hindu worship, still important in India. You've got Buddhism. So Buddhism has a significant influence on garden design. You've got the Zen gardens of China and Japan. Back to Christianity, Mary gardens are common in churches and institutions. I have made an error and I don't know what that is. I've not written down what that is. But this was the fact. This is the fact. The word paradise comes from the Persian word paradisas, which means walled garden.
Huh.
So the actual word paradise that we say heaven is paradise or whatever, it comes from walled garden, which is just it's just really cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah, so the actual idea, the notion of paradise as a garden, so it predates Islam, Judaism, Christianity. It actually stems from the Sumerian periods in 4000 BCE in Mesopotamia. So I just loved that little thing. Like I'm not religious in any way, but I do like the philosophy of Buddhism. I'm trying to get into that at the moment.
Yeah.
But I just found that really like, what? It's one of those facts that's like, oh my goodness, you know,
That's
heaven
really cool.
equals garden is the gist of it. You know, the ultimate thing that everybody wants is this paradise, and that paradise is a garden.
That's super cool.
So,
that is very cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
Wow, that's so, like, all of that was so fascinating.
And it's just like all the religions are just like, we all like gardens. They're really wonderful. So, you know, having the birds above and hearing a trickling of water and, you know, just that calm and joy that gardens bring to people is just so important. And so that nicely takes me on to a little bit of like modern day thing, like the ecologist in me, like wants to say, please let's throw plastic lawns in the bin. I don't know what it's the case is in the US, but in the UK we are having an absolute takeover of artificial lawns, and it causes me a small amount of rage. They have like, they're just bad in every way. They're bad in like pollution, microplastics. They're bad in terms of biodiversity. Obviously, it offers nothing to wildlife at all, not even shelter for a spider, for goodness sake. They can get really hot. So that's something that we've learned this summer, is that a lot of people with dogs I know get things like that, oh, it's because they're making a mess and blah, 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 blah. Well, they burn their feet on the artificial grass. I was in a garden centre the other day and I saw artificial lawn freshener, and it was like a lavender spray that you were supposed to spray all over your artificial lawn. And it's just like, come on, friends. Like, what will stop the lawn from smelling? Having a lawn.
Yeah, like grass.
Crazy.
Or plants,
I know, but come on. And if you use it a lot, it does stay down. And I just think, come on, please. And there is, petitions and stuff in the UK to get it banned. I think it did get to Parliament to debate, and I think they just threw it out. They weren't really bothered. But I see a lot of vans and stuff with artificial grass, take the hassle out of your garden. And a lot of that is the pressure. A lot of that is the pressure from people to keep your lawn mowed. And if people can't be bothered to mow the lawn, they go, oh, well, okay, well, I'll just get this artificial grass then. But wildlife is struggling so much now. They need grass. Grass is so good for shelter and, I really like grass. And I've got, a wildflower sort of section that I planted. I'm going to give it a mow now, actually, because it's this sort of time where everything's gone over and the seeds have gone. So it needs a mow down. But yeah, it just makes me sad. And if you are considering artificial grass, please give it a second thought, because it ends up being more of a hassle than having a lawn. And it doesn't look as good. And it's bad for the environment and it's bad for biodiversity, which is really struggling right now.
And if nothing else, it's really expensive. It is very expensive.
Yeah. It's sad. And just don't weed as much. I managed to convince one of my very good friends. She was out twice a week in the summer mowing her lawn. And I was just like, hey, what do you think about like having some wildflowers? And she really got on board and got a big wildflower mix and, spread it all and stuff. And I think she's managed it for a year. And she said, it was really nice. There's loads of bees everywhere. And, she was itching. She said, I am finding it really tough. I'm seeing it long and I just want to get out there with the lawnmower. I just want to mow it down, but I'm not, because she said I'm not allowed. But, she's now sort of, we've compromised now. And she's like, right, okay, well, I am going to go back to mowing, but I'm going to have a wildlife section over this end that I'm going to leave long, and I'm going to, so it just takes a little bit of, hey, you can have this. It takes a little bit of time, but you can have this. So yeah, let's hope that people don't keep being really lazy.
Yeah, you'll like this. We get a lot of blowing sand here where I live. We are not in the desert, but we are like a desert adjacent sort of. It's
right.
We're semi-arid, but we get these big windstorms that blows tons of sand and dust and all of that into where we live. Think of like, have you've seen The Mummy with Brendan Fraser, right?
There's big of course I have. Of course I have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We get those here. We get those big haboob, crazy dust storms sometimes. Mm-hmm. So everything gets a layer of sand deposited on it, including the artificial lawn. So I have actually literally seen someone pulling weeds out of their fake grass because they sand up and then weed seeds blow in and they're pulling, Palmer amaranth or whatever else out. And I'm like, we've maybe gone wrong somewhere. There's been a mistake made.
Yeah. And a lot of things are convenience, and people have busy lives and they're pulled hundreds of different ways and they just want an outside space that they can use. And it's just like, okay, but there are other things that aren't as bad. If you think the sun's going to bleach it as well, you leave something in a windowsill for, I mean, it must be worse in Texas, but, you leave something in a windowsill for a couple of months and the back of it is bleached. So, what's it going to look like for your lawn soon with your fake lavender spray all over it, and you're burning your feet when you go out. Yeah. So maybe try paving stones. Paving stones at least, because even though that's not beneficial to wildlife, it's still not polluting the atmosphere with plastic, which the artificial lawns are doing. I understand that not everyone has time. Or gravel.
Yeah, and it lets water through and it still benefits the soil and benefits the landscape in some way. And there's a lot of benefits. I'm with you. Like, not everyone likes lawns, and it's a big debate, again on Twitter, people get really angry about stuff, like really mad about stuff. So if you ever want to, like, if you ever need some drama in your life, just go look at lawn Twitter, and it's a whole thing. But
Yeah.
no, I am a big advocate of real plants. Put real plants out.
Yeah. And hopefully we're just about to move next week. So we've lived our life in pots. We've got all those bonsai, but we've also got a lot of potted plants that we've taken from here, there, and everywhere because we've not had our own place yet. So I don't want to plant my plants anywhere because I want to take them with me when I move. So hopefully we've now bought this house back in England, and it's an old cottage garden. It's an old sort of old 19th century, so sort of early 1800s house cottage, and it's got a very well established garden. It's got like maple trees, and it's really beautiful, and I'm looking forward to releasing my poor plants that are just sort of like, please let me out of this pot, and I'm like, I want to, but I've got nowhere to put you. So it will be nice when we move to finally start getting my hands into a bit of proper gardening, and got my father-in-law to help with that because I just like things because they're pretty. I don't really pay attention to when stuff's coming out because obviously you want things to be flowering at different stages over the year all the time, so that you've always got a point of interest is the buzzword that I've learned. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in and getting one of those little knee pads, like the little things that you kneel on. Getting one of those and being out in the garden with a big sun hat. That's something that I'm really looking forward to. So I'm going to rewild quite a lot of it. So have a little bit of lawn, but then making different spaces, making different areas, different seating areas that look completely different when you're over there and completely different when you're over there, and getting a wildlife pond and stuff. So
that's really
very
cool.
much look forward to it.
Real quick before we start wrapping up, tell us about Across the Ages. I want to make sure that my listeners hear about your podcast and go check it out.
So Across the Ages is a history podcast that I run, obviously, and I pick one topic. So I was going to do a wildlife podcast, but I was just like, hey, there's already so many good wildlife podcasts. I'm sure there's obviously lots of history ones as well, but I already get that fix in work and stuff. So I'll do a history one. So I wanted a bit of an angle, and I thought, hey, what if I cover one thing across time? So like we have today, we've picked gardens, and we've talked about gardens across different cultures and across time and done it, in a linear context. So my first episode was on shoes. My last episode was on weapons. So I definitely do not cover everything in every episode on that topic. I pick and choose things that are interesting and talk about them. So I've done contraception. I've done lady pirates. I've done pirates. I've done female pirates. Bonnie Pirate Lasses is what it's called. I couldn't remember what the episode was called. I've done one on there's one on torture coming up. I've not done it yet, but I will, because I did one on executions and it grossed people out quite a bit. So I thought, hey, I'll give you a little break. I'll give you a little break. So I've done hats. Sometimes they're quite frivolous topics that I just feel a bit more frivolous and want to do something like hats and cover crazy hats, and then other times it's something a bit more serious. So it's fun. They're normally under half an hour because I cannot speak slowly, so I do just smash through like the thing, and they're all under half an hour, so from 50 minutes to half an hour, and they're a nice little snippet if you have to drive to the shop to listen to. And they're fun.
Yeah, I love it.
like them.
I binged it over a weekend one time, and I think I listened to like 10 episodes or something. And but it's a brilliant podcast. It's so good. It's so much fun. You have just the best personality, and it really comes through in that show. And I really love it. So I would recommend that to anyone.
Thank you. So my Twitter is @_across the ages. I've got a Facebook page as well. It's not as active, but I do post the new episodes on there, which is Across the Ages pod. And I tend to do it once every 2 weeks. I had a big break. I've just come back from just chilling over the summer and just wanting to be outside instead of researching all the time. They take quite a lot of research. So, any reviews and stuff I really do appreciate, because they do take quite a lot of time. But people enjoy them and I enjoy them. So as long as that stays that way, I'll keep going.
For sure. So the last thing that I want to ask you, and it's something I ask all my guests, if you had a piece of advice for our listeners, and that could be about gardens, it could just be about life in general, really whatever. It could be, don't have fake grass. I don't care. What would that one thing you want people to take with them be?
The one big thing that I try and say to everybody is don't let other people affect how you behave. So just without being so cliche, be yourself. Like don't be like, oh, I can't do that. We're in public. Do that. Do what you want. Sing in the supermarket. Dance in the supermarket. I dance in the supermarket. If a banger comes on, like the tannoy, I'm off dancing down like the cheese aisle. But who cares? You're never going to see these people again. That's what I try and remember. Like, who cares? And, if they're not having joy in their lives, you should have joy in your life and don't let anyone else dim your shine.
I love it.
That's my bit of advice.
I love that so much. It's great.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Across the Ages. Where else can we find you? Are there other places you want to be found?
I have a nature-based, my main Twitter account, which is @Sabin. Where I talk about bats, and mostly I talk about bats. Mostly I talk about bats, but general nature stuff. And it's my personal account as well, so I just talk a load of rubbish on there as well. So I really like interacting with people. I won't ignore you if you want to chat to me. So those are the two accounts that I run. So yeah, but that's it really. Can't really find me anywhere else. If you Google me, I'll come up. That's how much time I spend on the internet. Yeah.
Oh yeah, me too. No, I'm there too. Well, Natalie, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed that. That was so much fun.
Me
so
too.
Much fun.
I had a lot of fun.
And thank you so much for being on. And we may have to have you back sometime to talk bonsai more, because I could talk about that for a long time.
We could have a whole episode, definitely.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for listening. Definitely go check out Across the Ages, and y'all keep being cool, and we'll talk soon. That was great, wasn't it? You enjoyed that. I know you did. And isn't Natalie's advice just so good of don't let anyone tell you who to be. Just be you. Just do what you want to do. Be happy. Dance in the grocery store. Be like me, and when you're riding in the car with your significant other, sing a different song than is on the radio. That may not always be the best for your health, but it is fun. Y'all, thanks so much for listening. I do this because of you, and I do this to tell stories and to tell about so many cool people that are out there. And thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting this show. Thank you for supporting my wonderful guests. It means the world to me. Again, look up Planthropology, all the places on social media. And thanks finally to the Texas Tech Department of Plant and Soil Science, without whose support I could not do this. I couldn't do this show. So y'all keep being cool, keep being kind, be safe, be smart, and I will talk to you in 2 weeks.